Greetings folks, today I'm going to show you how I build 5-room dungeons, including a couple of examples. In last week's video I talked about the concept of the 5-room dungeon and how I feel it is really useful in building adventures for your party, and a lot of people asked for some examples on how to build a 5-room dungeon, how to incorporate some of the elements, and how to tweak it. So let's dive in and get started. You can see here that I have opened up a Photoshop document and I'm going to be making my notes in Photoshop today. To recap, the 5 standard rooms in the 5-room dungeon are the entrance or guardian, the puzzle, the setback or the red herring, the climax or boss fight, and the reward or cliffhanger. So for our example, the party will have recently heard about a tomb that has been uncovered by local archaeologists, and it is said to contain great wealth and a magical artifact. The local archaeologists haven't been able to get inside, however, as there is a strong undead presence in the tomb. This is a pretty generic hook, but it's one that works really well because most players are going to be motivated either by the money, the chance to get a new magical item, or just for the chance to kill some undead. So they're going to have plenty of reasons to follow this particular plot hook down into this dungeon. Before we get started and begin making our rooms, we want to think a little bit about the story of this 5-room dungeon. It pays to give the story a little bit of thought before you start the mechanical process, because it might inform some of the elements that you put in your dungeon. So something that we might decide on is that a necromancer was entombed here many years ago, and some recent event has disturbed them. Whether or not you communicate to your players that this tomb belonged to a necromancer without them asking is up to you, but them knowing that a necromancer is supposedly the one entombed here will help a little bit further down the line. So I'm going to be making a very crude map in Photoshop, but you could do this on paper or any other drawing program that you want to use. It's just so that you can take notes and get an idea of the physical layout of your dungeon. If I were creating this for a full session, I would then take this crude map and transfer it into a dungeon painting studio map that looks much more polished and refined. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to make an entrance room. So for our entrance, as the players descend into the tomb, we might have an entrance hall here that is filled with skeletons. Now we want this to be a fairly easy fight because we're trying to lull the players into a false sense of security and make the red herring later on that much more pronounced. So have a few skeletons in here, don't make them too strong, just make them strong enough that it's clear that the local archaeologists couldn't have taken care of it, but for the adventurers it doesn't matter if it's quite easy. So once our players have defeated the skeletons, they will go through a small corridor and into a second room. Now in this second room there'll be more skeletons again, but this time they're not going to be animated and ready to fight. We'd want them scattered across the floor, skeletons in armor, clearly the bodies of previous adventurers, and we want them all pierced with many, many arrows. So in the center of the room where the bodies are thickest, there'll be a raised dais, and on that raised platform there will be several spinners and a lever. Each of these spinners is going to have 7 faces, and this is going to be our puzzle room, where the players will try and solve this puzzle, put these spinners in the right order, pull the lever to go through to the next section. They will note that all along the walls there will be holes, and it is obvious to them that if they don't get this right, arrows will fly out of the walls and they will join the corpses that are slowly filling this room over time. This is a puzzle I really like because it's based around the days of the week. In my campaign, I would use symbols to represent the different days of the week because my campaign uses slightly custom days, and it goes Sunday, Moon Day, Tower Day, Wine Day, Thunder Day, Fire Day, and star day. So I would use a sun, a moon, a tower, a goblet, a bolt of lightning, a flame symbol, and then a star. And the most important thing about this room is that when you are telling the players what the symbols are, you don't give them in the correct order of the days. You mix it up. This is a really simple puzzle, but players in general tend to overthink things in my experience. And if you give them a puzzle so simple, they will rack their brains trying to figure out the complicated answer to it, looking for clues around in previous rooms, thinking about things that other people might have told them during this session. And when they eventually realize that there are 7 spinners or as many spinners as there are days in your campaign's week, they'll have a real aha moment at how simple the puzzle is, but how long it kept them there for. So once they have completed the puzzle, we will open up a long corridor which will lead to a room that we want to present as if it's the final boss fight. So we might have really large, ornate and imposing doors leading into the room, and then the room itself should be fairly sizable. Maybe there are pillars keeping a large ceiling aloft. We want to give the players the impression that this is the sort of room that a boss fight would occur in. A big part of this particular 5-room dungeon is playing with player expectations. So for the boss of this room, we want something large and imposing and something that feels like a boss fight. So we might use a skeletal ogre or troll, something of that sort of size, along with a bunch of minions, smaller skeletons, to trick the players into thinking that this is the boss fight. So our boss, our ogre or troll, let's go with an ogre. Our ogre should be wearing an amulet or bracelet, something that looks like it's magical. And this will play into our red herring, because when the players defeat the ogre or troll, all the other skeletons are going to drop down as if they were being controlled by that creature. If the players detect magic on the amulet or bracelet, they're going to find an aura of conjuration, and they should come to the assumption that it's the amulet or bracelet that was raising the creatures and they were being controlled by this ogre. In reality, however, there will be a small secret room leading off from our main chamber, which contains the necromancer, the one who's actually responsible for all this. Now, depending on how the fight goes, you might want to have the necromancer come out of their own accord if the players don't notice this secret room. Perhaps you'd roll some passive perception checks to see whether they notice a gap in the wall, a movement of air, maybe scrapes on the floor from where the door has swung open. If they notice those things, then they might try and open this secret door. If they don't, they'll probably loot the bodies that are within this main chamber. They will take the amulet or bracelet off the ogre, assume that that is the magical artifact that they were promised would be in here, and maybe you could have a small chest in here as well, something that lets them think that they found the treasure. But if you set it up correctly and in the right way, they'll get a sense that something about this isn't right, that it was all a little bit too easy. Maybe they will realise, if they've spoken to people and been told that a necromancer was entombed here, that they've not actually come across a necromancer, and that this ogre doesn't seem like the sort of creature capable of raising the dead. But if they don't realise that this is a setup and not the real boss, you could have the necromancer come out of their lair and begin a new combat. If you want it to be a little more challenging, or you're feeling particularly mean, you could have the necromancer raise all those armoured skeletons that you found in room 2 and have them come up this corridor and cut off the party's means of escape. So the party has been assaulted on both sides. That'll add a nice dynamic to the combat, make it a little bit more interesting. So the necromancer is our real boss fight, our room 4, our climax. Once the party has defeated the necromancer and all of his mobs, they can move into that secret room, find the treasure, find the suitable magic item that was rumoured to be here, and you could finish there. It's a small dungeon that contains a series of different combats and puzzles that you can get through in a single session. If you wanted to add a little more depth to it, then you could structure it so that this series of rooms here could count as the introduction to the dungeon. So the players could come in, fight some easy skeletons, do a puzzle, do a fake boss fight, and then instead of having this be your room number 4, you could have a long secret tunnel that then leads into other areas of the dungeon, and expand the dungeon out that way if you want it to last more than one session, or if you've got a particularly long session or a group that can get through combat really easily. You could then have this be the red herring and then have several more puzzle rooms and combat rooms littered throughout. If you use a lot of 5-room dungeons, then this small, completely linear style of dungeon will get quite repetitive to your players. So an easy way to get around this is add small little antechambers onto your rooms that would serve a specific purpose when this tomb was active. So you might have a food store that's filled with barrels and baskets and sacks of long decomposed food. You might have an armory that's filled with rusted old weapons, and using these small little rooms that might not have combat in them, they might not have any meaningful loot, but it makes the 5-room dungeon feel more like a living, breathing space. And you can also use secret doors to link together parts of your dungeon and circumvent certain pathways. So perhaps this corridor up here is blocked by fallen debris. Maybe there's enough of a line of sight through it that they can tell that there's something here, and maybe there are braziers lit along this wall, so there's light flickering into this corridor. So the players know that something is through there, but they can't get through this blockage. So they have to backpedal and find the secret room here that leads them into this next area. And that's how you could run this dungeon as the typical 5-room dungeon setup. If you wanted to extend this story and use some of the elements from the 5-room dungeon idea in some new and interesting ways, the way I would suggest to do it is in this final room where the necromancer was hiding. When the players go in there expecting to find the treasure, have there be an ornate chest, a large ornate chest in there that they expect to be filled with treasure, but when they open it, find it empty. Instead of treasure inside this chest, they find a note that says something to the effect of "Thank you for keeping the undead occupied so I could come and claim my treasure," and then have it signed with some sort of moniker. What that would do is switch your red herring from being number 3 to being number 5. So you have a boss fight that is in 2 stages before your red herring. And then when the players expect to get their reward, they find out the reward's not there. They've been set up. A thief has used the fact that they have fought their way through the undead, and maybe they have come via a secret passageway that leads into the room, that maybe the door of that passageway is left open, so that when the players look in this chest and find the note, they see the secret door ajar and it leads them down this corridor, and they realise that they've cleared out this first room, which was all that was standing in the thief's way, and then the thief has gone up through the secret passageway, waited for that necromancer to go out, stole the loot, and made their escape. That would then mean that in a more general sense, this entire dungeon serves as our first room for a much larger and more social focused encounter. So the real adventure becomes finding this thief and reclaiming the treasure that they have stolen. The majority of this 5-room dungeon then would be the players speaking to NPCs, trying to learn the identity and location of this thief and recover the goods that have been stolen. If I were going to run it like this, I would have there be a historian in the nearby town that they spoke to before coming out to this dungeon, and I would have that person be the thief, so that we can have another red herring later in our story where it turns out that the person that hired them all along was only using them as cannon fodder so that they could sneak in and claim the treasure for themselves. Now, if you do that and introduce this historian NPC right away, the players are going to want to go back and speak to them because they're the most knowledgeable person surrounding this dungeon, this tomb. And you can use that as a way for the players to try and tease out some information from this NPC, see if they're lying. The NPC might feed them false information that leads them on a wild goose chase, and it'll be a really fun and interesting social encounter with a lot of back and forth between you, the Dungeon Master, playing this NPC, and the party trying to figure out what really happened here. Now, at some point, you're going to want the players to discover that they have been set up by this NPC that they thought they could trust, and they're going to confront the NPC. Now, when they first do this, I would suggest that you have the NPC escape somehow. Maybe they use a smoke bomb, maybe they use magic, maybe they're already gone by the time the players figure it out and come back. Maybe the players see this NPC crawling out the window. You want to give the players a setback leading in to the climax of our story, which would be the players chasing this NPC across town. And a skill challenge would be perfect for this. You could have each of the players roll different skills as they try and chase this thief who knows the area better than them across the town. They could use their acrobatics to climb on rooftops and get a better vantage point. They could use their athletics to try and catch up to them on long stretches, use their local knowledge for shortcuts, or use any number of skills to be able to close the distance between themselves and this NPC. If they fail this skill challenge, well, the thief will be in the wind, and then they have potentially an entire additional session in which they can try and track this NPC down and expand this story. If they succeed in catching the NPC, then maybe you'll want another combat. Maybe the NPC is much more skilled than they would have expected, and it's a much more challenging combat. Or maybe the NPC isn't the combative type, which is why they hired your players to go and clear out this tomb. Maybe instead they'll beg for their life, give up, and relinquish the treasure. This gives you an example of how to use some of the framework elements of a 5-room dungeon in something other than a typical dungeon. Even though this second section had very little combat, it still used many of the elements of the 5-room dungeon and treated each room as more of an event. This isn't something I would suggest to do every session, because if you run a 5-room dungeon every single session, it will start to get stale. If you want to run it fairly frequently, the 5-room dungeon structure, then experiment with it. Move the order of rooms around, add extra rooms, split them up like we've done here to include combat and puzzles and skill challenges and social encounters to keep things from getting boring doing the same thing every single week. But I hope this gives you an idea of how to use the 5-room dungeon framework to build out an actual adventure. If you have any questions, pop them in the comments below and I will do my best to answer them for you. Also, if you have any 5-room dungeon ideas of your own that you'd like to share with the community, pop them in the comments below. And until next time, happy gaming. Thanks for watching. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button down below for new content every single Friday. And if you want to keep watching, well, there's another couple videos for you to watch just over there. Happy gaming.